Hey guys, my name is Jennifer Brave. I'm the founder and owner of Facets Relational Care, and today I'm going to be talking about a form of abuse called stonewalling. Stonewalling is actually a very common form of abuse, and stonewalling isn't something that I think most people consider to be abuse. I know that until I got the education that I have today, I didn't consider stonewalling to be a form of abuse. At most, I think stonewalling is one of those things that just seems kind of childish, kind of mean. You know, you don't like it and it makes things uncomfortable and frustrating, but I don't think anybody really registers stonewalling as a type of abuse. Stonewalling, basically, as the name suggests, is separating and using separation or using the withholding of self as a form of abuse, or perhaps as a form of intimidation, as a intentional way to frustrate somebody or get somebody to the end of their rope so that you can then manipulate them a little bit more easily. So when someone stonewalls, the benefit to stonewalling for the person that is stonewalling is they conserve all of their energy and you waste all of yours trying to break through that stone wall. And that's what they want. Again, because if you can expend all of your energy and wear yourself out and get yourself to the point of frustration such that you're not thinking clearly anymore, you're very emotional, you can be more manipulated. It's easier to manipulate you when you're at that point. And the person that's been stonewalling, they're fine. They haven't reached that point of exhaustion, or they haven't reached that state emotionally or mentally where they're in a very heightened state. So in other words, they're not going to be easy to manipulate, and they know that. They can still remain cool and remain calm. And so for an abuser, stonewalling is one way that they maintain the upper hand over their victim. So that's a really vague description. What does stonewalling actually look like in real life? It can look like a lot of different things, and it's very subtle. And so it's really hard to know if somebody is stonewalling you. So I'm going to give you guys a few examples. Sometimes stonewalling is something as simple as just flat out ignoring you. This was something that my ex-husband did a lot. In fact, he used a lot of different stonewalling techniques as forms of abuse when we were married. One of the ways that that played out, in other words, one of the ways that he would just flat out ignore me, is if we were having a fight or an argument and I was really pushing my point or I was starting to get really upset, if he didn't want to give in or compromise, if it was going to be his way or the highway, he would just ignore me, just flat out ignore me. No more eye contact, wouldn't respond to anything that I said. He would sit on the couch, turn on the TV, and he would just like tunnel vision on the TV, just watch it. I could stand next to him and talk, and I would ask him questions, nothing, just watching the TV, intentionally ignoring me. The worst instance of stonewalling in this respect, I think, lasted like several hours. It was like 3 or 4 hours where he just ignored me. I mean, I got to the point where I gave up, and I actually left and ran a couple errands and came back and calmed down, and I tried to pick the conversation back up. Ignored me. TV, like tunnel vision, acted like he couldn't even hear what I was saying. That's a form of stonewalling. In other words, what he's trying to do in that situation, and by the way, what wound up being very successful for him was he just played deaf and dumb and didn't listen to me and waited until I got to the point where I was just so exhausted at trying to engage with him. And when I got to that point, he knew he was going to get what he wanted. And even if it really wasn't that he was going to get what he wanted, he knew that I would give up and stop nagging him or pressuring him to compromise or to give me something that I wanted. Another form of stonewalling. This is a more active form of stonewalling that doesn't look like stonewalling. If you get into an argument with somebody and suddenly they just start repeating the same sentence over and over and over and over and over and over, especially if it's a sentence that doesn't seem like it is as pertinent to the conversation as perhaps other things that they had said. In other words, if it seems like the sort of sentence that just doesn't make sense, like why would that be your argument? That's a form of stonewalling. It's an active form of stonewalling because unlike the example I just gave where my husband shut down and gave me nothing, there were other instances where he did this, where he would just select one particular sentence. And it didn't matter what I said, what question I said, what argument I said, that was the sentence that I got. And it was always a sentence that just wasn't entirely pertinent to the conversation that we were having. It was something very simple that me, being the person who was hearing it on the other end, couldn't really respond to it because it was just this simple sentence that didn't carry any sort of argument with it or really any sort of stance. It's just this bland, simple sentence that's kind of like, what do you do with that? And I would even challenge it, and I would say, that doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about. And he would repeat it. And then that would start a whole new phase of the argument where I would be trying to get him to come back into the argument, like explaining to him, you've gotten off topic, this is what I need you to pay attention to. And it was that sentence repeated again and again and again and again and again. And this is for the same purpose as the kind of passive stonewalling where they just stop talking to you altogether. It's for the same purpose. My husband knew in that situation if he would just repeat the same sentence again and again and again, and he knew that especially if it was a sentence that didn't make sense or wasn't pertinent to the conversation, that would frustrate me and it would get me emotionally riled up because I would try to engage him and draw him away from that sentence. And I was trying to, in those conversations, make sense of the sentence. I was trying to argue against the sentence. I was trying to use the sentence to re-engage him in the conversation. And people who abuse via stonewalling know that that's what you're going to do. So they're going to give you one sentence with it, and it's intentionally going to be what they know is going to be a confusing sentence for you. They want to give you a sentence that doesn't have a whole lot of information in it. In other words, they want to give you a sentence that doesn't have a whole lot that you can work with because they know that's going to rile you up and you're going to exhaust yourself and you're going to frustrate yourself and you're just going to get to the point where you can't handle talking to them anymore because they're just so simple. There's nothing that you can do with it. And again, this gives them the upper hand because you get exhausted, you get tired, and you give in. And they walk away with whatever they want. And all they had to do was just pick a simple sentence like, I got home at 6 o'clock. I got home at 6 o'clock. I got home at 6 o'clock. Again and again and again and again. They've won. Another form of stonewalling is if the abuser says to you, I shouldn't have to tell you what I'm thinking. I shouldn't have to tell you why that upset me. You know me well enough by now that you should know. I'm not telling you why it upset me. You have to figure it out. Then come find me and talk to me again after you figured it out. You know what you did. That's a form of stonewalling. Again, it's a more direct, overt form of stonewalling. In other words, the abuser is engaging in order to stonewall. And what's happening is the abuser is, first of all, putting a responsibility on the victim that is not the victim's responsibility. In other words, the abuser is telling the victim, you should know how I feel. You should know what you did to make me feel this way. You know me well enough. I shouldn't have to communicate to you anymore because you should be an omniscient deity of some kind that can read my mind and know everything about me. And then, because of course no human being is capable of doing this, and the abuser knows that, the abuser turns the fact that the victim can't do that into an opportunity to shame the victim. I'm not going to tell you what's wrong with me. You should have known better. You know exactly what you did. I'm not talking to you until you figure out what you did. In other words, making the victim feel bad for not having the omniscient power to read minds and making the victim feel bad because the abuser is refusing to participate in healthy communication, which is needed to resolve problems. The reason that abusers do this is the same reason that they would use any other type of stonewalling that I've mentioned so far. By doing this, by withholding information, by refusing to engage in the conversation in any sort of meaningful way, they frustrate the victim, who in this case feels terrible because, well, of course, I've known them forever. I should know this. I wonder what I did that's wrong. And the victim's overanalyzing themselves, beating themselves up, and they don't even know what they're beating themselves up for yet. They're just already in this mode of self-degradation, and their self-esteem is lowering. They're getting frustrated. They're getting exhausted. When this happens, the abuser can start throwing out little pieces of things that they just don't like in general. It doesn't even have to be anything that pertains to why they're upset. The abuser could just say, well, you know, you did that and I just don't like that. And the victim at this point has been groomed in such a way that they feel terrible and they think, oh, I'm never going to do that again. That was terrible. I shouldn't have done that. The abuser says, you have to do this to make me happy. The victim believes it's their responsibility to care for the needs of the abuser. In other words, I have to make the abuser happy. I have to pick up the communication and I have to read his mind when he doesn't want to communicate with me. The abuser now has this victim in a position where they can manipulate them to get whatever they want. And all that they had to do was make the victim feel confused, make the victim take on responsibility of the abuser's emotions, make the victim take on responsibility for the entirety of the communication at hand, and then shame the victim for failing to live up to those things which were never theirs to live up to in the first place. This is another thing that my husband was really good at doing. So that's another way that someone could stonewall. Another way that an abuser could stonewall could be to threaten to remove contact with you or their relationship with you unless you change in such a way that makes them happy. And I'm not talking about instances where perhaps you're being an abusive person and the abuser has to place a boundary so that you don't abuse them. I'm talking about something as simple as, I don't like the fact that you dyed your hair blonde. I really like you as a brunette. I'm not going to go with you anywhere in public until you dye your hair back, as a brunette, because I think that looks ugly and I don't want to be seen with you. So in other words, the abuser in this situation is threatening to remove relationship or remove contact unless the victim has a hair color that the abuser likes. My ex-husband did this one as well. It is frustrating as fuck. It does make you feel like you're losing your ever-loving mind. I mean, really the best way to engage with an abuser that's stonewalling is to not engage. It's really not. That's what they want. They want you to engage so that they can get you worked up and exhausted and they can get you feeling bad about yourself. And then they come in and take advantage of you when you're in that psychological and emotional state. So those are some examples of what stonewalling can look like. I want to say, as an afterthought, I have found that stonewalling happens a lot with abusers who have an Enneagram Type 9 personality. My ex-husband had an Enneagram Type 9 personality. That's not to say that anybody with any personality type couldn't stonewall, because that absolutely does happen too. But in the instances that I've seen it in other people and that I've experienced it, it's been with people that have a Type 9 personality. I've known of, I had one instance where I knew somebody who was a 2 that did that to me as well, but it's a form of abuse that I think perfectly aligns with the Enneagram Type 9 personality. That's just their method really for responding to things in life that are uncomfortable for them in general. They just kind of put that wall up. They're good at making it look like they care or that they're listening or that they're engaged, but in here, they're gone. They've checked out. You're not going to get anywhere with them. And with Type 9s in general, a rule of thumb with them is the more pressure you apply, the more you nag, as they'll call it, the more that they're going to withdraw and put that stone wall up, the more they're going to make it look like they care on the outside in a very passive kind of a way, but the more they've just checked out up here and they've decided, now I'm really not going to do it because you're putting all of this pressure on me to do it. But that's never something with Enneagram Type 9 that is overtly stated. It's very deceptive, actually, because again, they'll give off the image of caring and the image of being willing to compromise or consider a different perspective. And then at the end of the day, they don't change because they never had any intention of changing anyway. It's like they kind of play the role that they think you want them to play and having no intention at all to follow through on the promises that they've made. I'm not saying that everybody with an Enneagram Type 9 personality is that way. These are traits that you find with unhealthier Enneagram Type 9s, but I just wanted to mention it because it is such a strong correlation, stonewalling with Enneagram Type 9. Yeah, I just thought it was fascinating. So anyways, that is stonewalling, a form of abuse that most people don't recognize as a form of abuse.